All right, guys, today we're going to go over some very basics on design for the restorations that you're going to be doing in inlay, onlay, and crownlay. These are kind of my go-to restorations in my practice, and they're ultra conservative adhesive bonded ceramic restorations using either lithium disilicate, lucite reinforced materials, or resin nanoceramics. So the first step is to set the case up right. Let's do an inlay first. So you select the tooth, select inlay. Let's just say we're going to do Emax here. If you do Emax, you want a medium or high translucency restoration. And we're going to start scanning. The single most important thing is your first second of scanning, and that has to be from a top-down view, okay? So if you activate the camera prematurely and you enter into the mouth and you accidentally scan from a kind of crooked angle, it's going to kind of mess up your digital model once it renders. Everything from there on is just simple rotational based scanning. Nothing else really matters. You just kind of overlap your scans and try to capture as much information as needed, but nothing that is not really needed. So you don't necessarily, for such a small restoration like this, need to go, say, all the way to the cross arch. Now, if you hold the camera still or hold down the bottom button, you could take these HD snapshots, preferentially from the path of insertion of the restoration. You could take multiple. And here, I just missed that distal interproximal of tooth number 20, so I just captured that real quick. Okay, model is rendered, and the next step is going to be, let's just take a look at the color. Now, color looks fantastic on the HD snapshots on real teeth, but maybe not so much on Typodon. The opposing, same thing, straight down occlusal view for your first 1 second of scanning with this scanner, and capture the buccal in great detail. In the occlusal surfaces, the lingual, you really don't need the straight lingual. Let's take a look, let's rotate that. You see, you could leave those voids there. Now, if you're sending to the lab and you're not milling in-house, some labs want you to fill in those linguals so they could 3D print those models, and they somehow don't know how to fill those holes, or their CAD software will give them errors. Now you're on to the bites. Focus on one arch at a time and go slow. So you don't want to be going wicked fast with your bite scans, because you need this computer to have time to think to merge in those models into the buccal bite scan. And as you can see here, we're going to click this little icon here. We got the green dot. That means we're good with the articulation. We could see the occlusal marks on 20 and 18. Now, let's just pretend we didn't get an automatic articulation. All you do is drag the blue buccal bite up to the top and get it kind of lined up as close as you can, and then drag the mandibular scan up to that merge scan, clicking on a cusp tip and dragging it to the same cusp tip on the blue bite. So there you go. Not a big deal. Sometimes clinically we don't get automatic articulations. So now, the first thing that you need to do is go to the margin tab and set the path of insertion for this restoration, which actually does determine mill path. And we'll go over that maybe later, but it is important to get this lined up so the restoration kind of will drop right out of the screen and fall into that prep. 3 ways you can mark your margin. Paint works really well with inlays. You just literally kind of sloppily circumscribe the area, then hit the paint icon one more time, and then it goes and finds that margin. Trace is an automatic kind of margin marking feature that you could then, in this instance, I'm using add segments. By the way, all the margin tools except move, you have to actually hit the icon again to activate. With move, you just drag. And then lastly, there's trace. Trace has no automatic feature whatsoever. So basically where you click, that margin line is going, which comes in handy clinically if you have super subgingival preparations that you can't really rely on any automatic margin finding ability to capture. So you can just go to that manual trace. Okay, so then we have add segments. Add segments will give you that error if you don't click well before the defect and well after the defect onto the lasso line. Then it will heal it. You could turn on and off your margin. You could hit that icon there that turns high areas green. I don't find that very much helpful, except every now and then I could see a little error. Then you have to do this extra step where you circumscribe the whole tooth in green. This is super important. This icon right here with like a scissor on it. Click that icon, go ahead and circle the entire tooth from the occlusal view. Only need to do this for inlays and onlays, and what that's doing is determining the path, kind of the size of the tooth, what cusps need to be where. Then you're going to go onto the plan tab. If you see up there on the top, the menu bar just goes from setup, scan, margin, plan, then design. Design tab, that's our initial proposal, and we have some insanely powerful tools to tinker with this. First thing I do is get my marginal ridges lined up with rubber tooth. Okay, so my marginal ridges are lined up, and yes, I do see that kind of somebody obliterated the tooth number 20 in front of it. Now I'm using the define feature to kind of accentuate some anatomy. Trim the icon, trim icon to just look at the tooth, turning on the occlusion. You can see those icons highlighted orange there. And now I'm going to adjust that occlusion by going to the occlusal refinement tab and circling those down. That's going to give me a little thin area there, but I'm okay with that. There we go. That is the inlay in a nutshell. Now, before you mill this sucker, we're going to put the sprue right on the mesial. We're going to sim it in detail mode. And we're going to look at how it fits by turning the model on and looking at the under surface and then slicing it, looking for binding spots along the axial walls, looking at our cement spacer, our margin ramp, and all this stuff we're going to go over in class. So we're pretty good. For inlays, I don't like my inlays to fit really tight because I don't want them to act as a wedge as I'm trying to seat that restoration. So I'm going to decrease my margin ramp to around 0.1 so that I don't get kind of pressure on that occlusal margin as I'm seating it. And that's going to actually decrease the amount of surface area that's closed at the margin to make it just a tiny, tiny little bit, which also allows the cement to vent out the occlusal surface as you seat that restoration so you can ensure you get full seating. Now we're going to sim it in standard mode, and we're going to look and see, and you could see in standard mode uses a bigger burr and you're going to get over milling. Alright, let's move on. Flying here, going through the Onlay restoration. Same thing, Emax, medium translucency or high translucency for onlays. First second of scanning, single most important second of your scan. So from the straight down occlusal view, okay. Everything else from there is just rotational based scanning like it is for every other scanner on the market. And it doesn't really matter the sequence, you just obviously have to overlap your scans in such a manner that the computer is able to use common points of interest between each individual image. And then of course you can do some HD snapshots. I usually take a few for each prep, kind of rotating ever so slightly, changing my angle, and these things are looking real hot clinically when I do that. Alright, let's take a look at the model and see if there's any areas that I missed. Before you generate the model, you could look, or you could generate it and then hit the highlight low data area and look for like bluish areas. So you can see that blue area. It's not that critical of a spot, but I'm going to go ahead back and just fill it in. Here we go. Trying to rotate that camera kind of underneath the height contour of that mesial to sneak it into that crevice there. Those are always tricky areas to scan on any camera. Right where that box corner is. Okay, that probably will do it. Let's take a quick peek and see how we got. Yeah, that already looks better. Good. Okay, same thing with the opposing. We're going to go ahead and look at that opposing and just scan the occlusal and the buckle. So let's do that now. Notice that when I'm scanning the typodont, that little blue icon is highlighted underneath the camera icon on the bottom left screen. That's turning the brightness down a little bit. That's the opposings are always like you definitely don't want to spend a lot of time on your opposing scans. Leaving a little bit of lingual data, focusing on one arch at a time until it ghosts in, then going to the opposite arch, okay? And that's ghosting. And I always like to go a little bit, I don't stop immediately after ghost in. I keep going because it actually will keep finalizing that bite and adjusting it if you give it more information. So it's kind of cool. All right, once again, the little green icon is highlighted on the right middle of the screen, that tiny little green dot, and we have a good articulation of our bite. And if you were concerned about the accuracy of the articulation, you can go into the actual bite tab and look at the actual measurements and distances between the teeth and see if there's any over articulation or anything like that. You could even pre-mark the teeth with ribbon paper before you scan, and you will be able to hopefully see those scans. All right, so next step is the actual orientation of the model, probably one of the more important steps. It affects everything from your design to your mill. And once again, just like the inlay, it's from a straight down occlusal view. Now we're marking the margin with paint. Paint is actually really good for onlays as well as inlays. Now we're defaulting to this move margin, where you just literally quickly click a little piece of the lasso and you can alter it. Once again, you can change the brightness in the scan tab and then go back to the margin tab and click the little color icon there, and it will be whatever you left it in the scan tab. Now we're using trace. Trace is the one that is completely manual. It has no automatic feature whatsoever, so basically wherever you're clicking, the margin is going. And then you could go to the move margin and drag the rope. There is that bubble on the top right hand corner of the screen, which essentially lets you define how much of that rope you want to drag. Okay. With inlays and onlays, you want to be very careful not to drag the rope over onto the occlusal surface, which would prevent seating of the restoration. Now we're going to try lasso. Lasso works really well for these types of restorations as well. We're going to that extra step as I showed you in the inlay, where you circle and circumscribe the tooth. Once again, kind of an extra step for inlays and onlays. Then we're off to the plan tab, where you use the 3 tools, basically rotate, resize, and move. And you're going to move that tooth to where it's a match of what you envision the whole entire tooth would look like. Off to design, and you're going to hit apply for autogenesis. Marginal ridges are the first thing that I mess with. Bead of ceramic using the dropper to boost those margin thicknesses, and that's about it. Maybe a little crazy anatomy here just to make it look hot. That is looking super nice. Check that proximal contact. You want it to be that teal green, Hawaii Oasis green look. And then trimming it, occlusal contacts, hit the occlusal icon twice to turn it kind of semi-transparent. And I'm just going back to the contact refinement tab and circling those occlusal marks, knowing that in this instance the contact point is right along that margin, which is not necessarily ideal, but sometimes unavoidable clinically. And would I go ahead and obliterate the remaining cusps to avoid that? Probably not. Off to the mill tab, moving that sprue using the compass to a position that you like, and then simulating this in detail mode first, and looking down from the underside, you should see a semi-distinct blue line all the way around the margin, or almost coincident all the way around the margin. And here we could see the cement space on detail mode is wicked thin. I like it, but I'm going to go ahead and decrease my margin ramp. I like my margin ramp to be around the 0.1 for inlays and onlays, and I'm going to boost my cement space a little bit for this onlay as well. You just don't want your margin ramp to be a lower value than your cement space. So if your margin ramp is 0.1, let's say it's 0.1, you don't want your cement gap to be less than 0.1. So that's why I boosted it up to like 0.2, extra 100 microns there. So now I'm going to look again. Let's take a look and see what we got. I like that better than what we had before. Less potential for the restoration to bind along the walls as you're trying to seat it down. Okay. All right. My last design is going to be a crown lay. You're going to call this a crown. Still want to use a medium translucency glass for this. Same exact thing. Start scanning from the top down. After you get that initial 1 second scan, rotational based scanning, it doesn't matter for quadrants whether you roll lingual first or buccal first or focus on your prep first, or it doesn't matter. studies show that that doesn't really affect the accuracy at all, unlike a full arch scan, which should have a certain kind of pattern that you follow every time. Just doing that rotational based imaging, try to sneak the light even like as far gingerly as I can below those high margins there, rotating it into the proximal contacts, taking some HD snapshots. This is a big tooth, so I'm going to have to take multiple. Alright, that looks pretty good. Let's take a look at the rendered model. Nice. Color looks good. Alright, not worried about that hole on the distal of that premolar. Back in the day, labs would call and be like, we can't use that model as a hole back there. If your lab does that and they don't know how to patch that hole, like, you definitely need a new lab, run fast. Okay, so once again, occlusal view first and then rotating the buckle. Not getting the lingual really, except just as those cuss tips round off to make sure that I get that occlusion. Make sure to get the tissue in there really well. Bite scan, focus on one arch at a time until it goes in, and then zigzag to the opposing arch. There you go. And then keep going a little bit because it does settle. Alright, that looks good. Everything looks like it's properly articulated. It's nice. You could tell how accurate it is because we're getting the same 4 dots on every single scan that we've done so far. Set the orientation from a straight down occlusal view. Paint works nice for crownlays. Now, oftentimes clinically, the mesial and distal boxes you'll have to go back and edit with add segments. On a typodont, probably not. Here I'm going to use trace and show you what that looks like, or lasso. Let's see. Forget trace. You guys have seen it too much. You click basically around 4 clicks around the tooth, and it doesn't really matter where. You just want to click maybe at the line angles and then click on the same ball you started, and then it defaults to move margin, and you just drag little areas that you need to, and you could alter the amount that you drag. I'm going to create a defect here and show you how you would fix that. Let's say the margin fell off like that. You would go to add segments, click a yellow ball or two before the defect, and then keep clicking along until after the defect and hit add segments again, and we'll go ahead and patch that. Go right to the plan tab. You do not need to circle the whole prep green like you do for inlays and onlays. Stretch that tooth, autogenesis, hit apply. That's what we're getting. Marginal ridges are usually the first thing that I do. Kind of broaden my proximal contacts and do my marginal ridges. Look at it from the side to see if those marginal ridges are about in line with my adjacent teeth. They're very, very close. There we go. And then the next step is to take my material thickness into consideration here. So I'm going to just boost that deep pit using rubber tooth again. Everything's good. Remember, Emax bonded Crownlay 1 millimeter is fine, which is green, greenish yellow. Put my occlusion on, go to my occlusal adjustment tab, and circle the ones that you don't want. Definitely don't want any contact on inclined planes. That's going to be a tensile force on that restoration. Try to focus on putting your occlusal contacts more towards the center of the tooth, not so far out to act as a cantilever to dislodge the restoration. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on. Hawaii green proximal contact is kind of like very pretty oasis color here. Just using smooth tool. Okay, I use smooth and dropper to adjust proximal contacts. Now I'm just using dropper to add a little bead of ceramic all the way around the margin just to increase the thickness a smidge on the default setting of the dropper tool. Off to the mill tab. Let's go ahead and see here. Let's sim it in standard mode, and we're going to look at the overmilling. Overmilling occurs when the burr is thicker than the area to which it wants to mill on the prep. Not a lot of overmilling on the mesiodistal slice plane. Let's look at a buccal lingual slice plane. Yeah, so we're getting a little bit of overmilling on that lingual cusp right there. That's not that big of a deal. I would still mill this in standard mode unless that overmilling was going to cause my cusp there to be less than 1 millimeter thick. Does that make sense? Let's look at detailed mode just so I can show you guys what I mean. Detailed mode is going to use a tiny burr to mill that, which is a lot more, it's able to accommodate better for thin areas of a prep. So if you look now at this detailed mode simulation and we look at the same slice plane and we're going to rotate that, we're going to look and see that you don't have that kind of overmilling on that lingual cusp anymore. It's a perfect adaptation of that. See? And you get that line everywhere. So perfect. All right, so those are, dude, this is just super quick. You guys are going to be designing a ton of these. So let's just use these as a quick reference and then just have some fun. Hope this helps a little bit.